What's up, YouTube? This is Politically Incorrect, all right? So in this video, I said I wasn't going to do a video talking about this, but it just needs to be said. It needs to be said because there are so many people out there that are pushing so much misinformation when it comes to elections now. So Republicans pretty much in the Trump era are not going to accept electoral defeat. You know, they're going to always presume electoral fraud. Even before the election is conducted, if their internal polling or polls are showing that they're going to lose a race, they're going to just magically bring up, uh, issues with, you know, electoral, uh, you know, irregularities, or make sure the election process is fluid, and we don't want to see fraud or election integrity. All these dumb fucking made up terms, okay? When there's nothing there to even insinuate or even to suspect electoral fraud. Okay? Now look, there are some certain facts about elections. There's always going to be slight irregularities when it comes to election. What I mean by that, you can run the votes, all 160 million of them, and come up with a slightly different number each time. It might be different by 30 votes. It might be different by 100 votes. It might be different by 80 votes. That just happens. That's normal. Okay? What I mean by that is you could run all of the votes from, let's say, last year, and Trump might get 74,168,349. Then you can run all the votes again, and it'll say 74,174,000, blah, 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 blah. Well, how do you get 5,000 more votes? It just happens, okay? If you know anything about elections, that happens. Electoral fraud is something totally different. That's when you see evidence that votes are being taken away from a candidate on a grand scale and added to another one. Or back in the days when one particular precinct is voting way out of whack. Okay. For instance, 1948, I think it was, the senatorial election. The LBJ really lost, but due to his cronies, they stuffed the ballot boxes. Okay, you had one particular precinct that was supposed to have been pro Stevenson. All right, he was running against a fellow named Stevenson, former governor of Texas. Somehow, instead of that district being close, at least, it went to LBJ something like 200 and something votes to 12, and that was enough to give him the election by only 87 votes. It was obviously a rigged precinct, and there was other precincts that were rigged as well. But the guy who's running the election was an LBJ guy, and he made sure LBJ won the election. That's voter fraud. In 1960, what we saw was dead people being on the voter rolls. We saw electoral fraud, uh, obviously in the city of Chicago, which gave the state from Nixon to Kennedy. We saw electoral fraud, also evidence of it in Missouri, which narrowly went to Kennedy over Nixon by some 10,000 votes out of almost 2 million cast. There was also electoral fraud in Texas. Now, I'm not sure that the electoral fraud, if you corrected it, would have been enough to switch it from Kennedy to Nixon. But still, that's electoral fraud. Kennedy, Nixon never challenged the election because he thought that A, it would have made him look like he was a sore loser, and B, he was only 47 years old. He was young enough to the point where he could run for president again. He made the right decision because he was able to run for president again in 1968, and he won the election. But enough of that little history. This is what's annoying me. It's bad enough that people make electoral fraud accusations with 2020, and they still don't want to accept the election, right? But when you go around saying that the California recall was rigged, you lose all credibility, Josh. Okay? Yeah, you say, well, you list all these reasons that nobody cares about as to why would they why would the people reelect Gavin Newsom? Why would they reelect Gavin Newsom? And then I tell you, Josh, this. The same reason why Republicans, despite all of the bullshit that Donald Trump has done in the last 4 years, why 90% of them still back Donald Trump, despite all of the evidence of criminality, despite all of the evidence of him wanting to be a basically a dictator, despite all of the disrespectful things he said about the military, about those who serve, despite all of the illegal things and unethical things he's done, 90% of Republicans still back Trump. Okay? So miss me with your bullshit. Okay? Democrats are going to be loyal to Democrats. They're not going to usually vote for Republicans, let alone an extremist, Oreo cookie ass, self hating jigaboo like fucking Larry Elder. And yes, voters were dissatisfied with with Gavin Newsom and the whole everything that's going on with the pandemic, the economic downturn, all of that shit. Okay, but when the alternative is Larry Elder, and I predicted this, I said he was going to survive the recall easily. I just didn't know it was going to be by that big a fucking margin. I thought, maybe at best 58%, 42%. You know what I'm saying? I thought 58-42, maybe 60-40. But the final margin was, what was it? Right now it is 63% to 37%. A landslide. Okay? It's not close. And as a matter of fact, Gavin Newsom was reaffirmed governor by a larger margin in the recall than he was elected in the first election. So he's in a better position than he before. Well, let's just talk numbers. California is the bluest state, pretty much the bluest state in the union. Now you could argue Hawaii is, but it's pretty much California considering how large it is. Matter of fact, if you want to know why Democrats tend to have such a lock on the national popular vote, it's because of their huge majorities that they're piling up in California and New York, two of the most populous states in the union. Okay? California has not been competitive, has not even been competitive on a presidential level since 1988. That's the last time a Republican won the state, George Herbert Walker Bush. In 1992, Bill Clinton, I believe, won California by 14 points. In 1996, I believe he won it by some 20 points or so. Can't remember the exact margin, but it was pretty big. I think it was something like 16 or 18 points. Al Gore won California by a large margin. The last Republican to get 40% of the vote in California was George Walker Bush in 2004 when he won 45% of the vote. That's the last time that a Republican even seriously contested California. And then people say, well, how can you have an election where they as soon as the polls close, they call a state? That's rigging it. Really? Well, why don't you have that same energy, Josh, when states like Idaho, when states like Wyoming and Montana and North Dakota, South Dakota, uh, Utah, Why don't you have the same energy when the polls close in those states and they're called for Trump immediately? Kansas, and, Nebraska, Missouri, almost, if not immediately, very close to the polls close, because those states are heavily Republican. And if you have a Republican that's polling with a 20 to 25%, 30% majority, you don't really need to count the votes because of exit polling. So a lot of people aren't really educated in how the electoral process works. Exit polling, which has picked up steam since the 1980s, and the reason why they exit poll is to kind of get a gist of, or a better grasp on how the electorate is going to vote on any particular state. Now, is exit polling foolproof? No. In a close state, exit polling can be off a little bit. Exit polling in 2004 had Kerry winning had Kerry winning Pennsylvania and Florida. That didn't happen. So exit polling can be off. But for the most part, exit polling is pretty accurate, especially in a state that's going to be a landslide. California has not been a seriously contested state in almost 20 years. California went to Obama by 25 points in 2008 and 2012. Hillary won the state by 30 points in 2016. Joe Biden got 65% of the fucking vote in 2020. So this is a state that's extremely blue. Okay, Democrats outnumber Republicans more than 2-1. And to be honest with you, I was telling a friend of mine, I don't know why they weren't calling the election sooner for Gavin Newsom. But I think they held off because of pressure, because people claim that CNN and MSNBC are being biased. So they intentionally held off until it was 60 plus percent of the vote in to call it for Newsom. Because I think had it been any other climate in any other year, they probably would have projected Newsom the winner once the polls closed, or at least with maybe 20% or 30% of the vote in. But see, if you're not familiar with the electoral process, then you're gonna say, "Oh, this is fraud, and that is fraud, and this is fraud." It's not, man. Okay, you. I advise anybody who wants to get a better idea about how elections are called, go on YouTube and look at some old election footage from the 50s and go forward, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There are a number of states especially if you go from the 60s onward. 1950s is a little bit more primitive. But if you go in the 60s into the 70s, you'll see there's a lot of states that when the polls are closed, especially states that are heavily Republican or heavily Democrat, they're going to call it immediately. And also, the way states vote change over time. New York used to be more competitive. New York used to be a more competitive state where Republicans could win. But the last Republican to carry the state of New York on a national level was Ronald Reagan. Ever since then, especially starting in the 1990s, New York has trended more Democratic. Now, New York used to be a lean Democratic state, but it was a swing state. Since the 90s, it's become increasingly Democratic to the point where when the polls close, because of New York City, you know, and how many people live in New York City and how democratic that city is, 75 to 80%. Democrats have a lock for the most part on that state, especially when it comes to national politics. But I just want to do this video. Republicans, stop calling fraud in every election that you lose. You know the GOP is pretty much, I'm not going to say it's an extinct party, but the Republican Party is a true minority party when it comes to California. And I'm going to say this too. The 2021 recall was different from the 2003 recall. California has become a younger state as far as demographic. It's become a less white state. It's much more diverse, much more Latinos. It's become ideologically much more liberal. And as a result of this is not an optimum state for Republicans anymore. Also, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was running for president, running for governor in 2003, first of all, it's Arnold fucking Schwarzenegger. Plus, he was able to make the election about Gray Davis and his performance as governor. Whereas, if you want to blame the liberal media, fine. But Larry Elder helped. The election became more about Larry Elder and his gaffes, his extreme views, and the fact that I'm gonna tell you something. I'm starting to suspect that egging situation with the woman. I think that was planned. I don't think that was just a woman doing it. I think they set that shit up. I think they set that shit up, and it looked fake to me. Just looked really fucking fake. Um, but anyway, people just thought about it. They said, "Yeah, we're angry with Gavin Newsom right now," but when the reality was, if we vote no, or we vote yes on the recall, I should say, and Larry Elder becomes the governor, do we fucking want that? Fuck no. So they voted no. They came out in droves on election day and said, no, we're not going to take this guy out for this motherfucker? Hell no. So you have Larry Elder to thank for losing the recall. Okay? As I said before, black Republicans are electoral poison. Look at the history. They just don't do very well when it comes to elections. So that's one down, and I guarantee you, Allen West is going to lose the Republican nomination for governor against Greg Abbott next year, and Herschel Walker is going to lose in his electoral bid against Raphael Warnock. I guarantee, because black Republicans, just don't do very well in elections. But tell me what you guys think.